the Book Baron. Welcome in, everybody. If you are new here, my name is Baron, and today you might be able to tell that we are experiencing a little bit of gray weather. We have another atmospheric river here, so I have us pushed up against the window a little bit harder this time, so the background might look a little bit different, but hopefully we've got enough light because today we're talking about some books that I'm unhauling. Now, I don't always talk about all the books that I unhaul. There are some books that I feel are just very temporary in their period of time with me. So I often get rid of books, but this time around, I was very intentionally going through my shelves and really asking some hard questions about whether or not the books that are on there actually represent my taste. And I gotta be honest, the vast majority of the time, the answer is no. It's not to say that I don't like these books, but some of them, they're not like a full 5 stars. Some of these are from like defunct video ideas that just I never got around to. Some of these are from my previous life when I read a lot more lit fic and horror. So you'll see some of those. I'll probably go through those first so that we can kind of burn through those quicker. And then we can get to some books that might be surprising because they're books that I like, but I just don't have shelf space for them. And so they gotta go. Without further ado, let's just jump into all of the books. So as I said, I'm gonna go through some of the non-romance books so that we can kind of get into those later. If you're maybe not as interested in those, you'll be able to hopefully skip past this fairly easily. The first book that I'm getting rid of is The Fury by Alex Michaelides. This used to be one of my absolute favorite thriller authors. I really enjoyed, I know a lot of people hate The Maidens. I really enjoyed it. I love a good cult. And I loved the tie-ins that it had to The Silent Patient, which was also another favorite. I just have not been pulled in and wanted to read this. And the funny thing is, I don't own The Maidens, I don't own The Silent Patient, and so then even though this is like one of my favorite thriller authors, why would I have this one that I've never read and just genuinely I'm finding don't really have an interest in? So I'm unhauling that one. Next up is one called Snow Falling on the Cedars. So this is a historical fiction book that I read. I used to really read a lot of like award-winning books. I don't even know which one this won. It's a story that actually takes place sort of in my area. It's in the Pacific Northwest, and it's about a Japanese man that was accused of murder. Again, I don't really feel like this represents my taste. I think I really hung on to this one because it took place in my area, and so I kind of felt tied to it in that way, but it doesn't really represent my taste. So I'm getting rid of that one. Next up, I don't even know how I got this one. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Again, I was into reading a lot of books that had different awards. This was like a finalist for the Critics' Circle Choice. I don't know. Honestly, I didn't pick up stuff back in the day based on whether or not I thought it was interesting. I picked it up based on whether or not I felt I should read it, because I felt like that's how adults read. So this is one of those. I don't know why I still have it. I think in the back of my head, because it's gonna be a movie, I was like, oh, I'll read it before I watch the movie. I'm not even interested in the movie. I don't even know what this is about, so I'm getting rid of it. Next up is Mexican Gothic. So I used to read a ton of horror. This is by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is fun. It's got like a little bit of magical realism, very eerie, very spooky. Enjoyed it, but again, it's not one that I necessarily need on my shelves. I just don't really read a ton of horror. I don't reread horror very often when I do read it, so getting rid of that one. Next up, a thriller that I never read, sadly, The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. So this one sounded so cool. And even when I read the description, I'm like, ooh, that sounds so good, because it's taking place in New York City. It involves the Met. It involves the Cloisters, which is it medieval art museum and garden? Yeah. And it involves tarot cards and researchers. And this cover is just like, I love that cover. It's so beautiful. And it sounds so cool and eerie and dark academia and all of that. I never pick it up. And I love how it looks. I think it sounds so cool. I never pick it up. So I need to get rid of it. If I'm gonna read it, I'm sure I can grab it from the library. Next up is another one that I've read and really loved, Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this is one that I have kind of like lied to myself for multiple years and said I was gonna go back and highlight because I loved it so much. I don't think I'm gonna do that ever. I might reread it via audio, but honestly, I don't need a physical copy of this. In fairness, I used to purchase, I should say, all of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books because I read Daisy Jones and the Six, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I still own that book, by the way. I love that one. She was like a go-to auto-buy author, and then something happened with Malibu Rising, and then since then, her and I just don't get along. So I kind of feel like that's, not that it's soured my opinion of this book, but it's just like it's made me less excited to pick this up because I think what I'm looking for from a story has changed since I used to read her stuff. So again, I'm not exactly like excited to reread this one. If I want to, I think the audiobook experience will be probably better anyway, so getting rid of that one. Next up is one that I actually talked about, well, semi-recently. It's My Dark Vanessa by Katie Elizabeth Russell. So this is one about a student-teacher relationship, but it's not a romance, or about like the Me Too movement, and like as an adult, this woman is kind of reflecting on her first love, quote unquote, with a teacher and really examining whether or not that was a consensual relationship. This is one that for years I've told myself I'm gonna read. Again, this is carried over from an era of when I felt like there was books that I had to read because the content was something I had to consume, or I had to read it because it was award-winning, that other people liked, that was notable, and that's how I kind of like based a lot of my decisions on what books I would read. And the reality is, just because of the dark content that this would be covering, I just don't think that it's in my best interest, honestly, for my mental health, to actually go through and read this. If I want to tackle things on this subject, I think a better venue for me to really reflect on this would be to consume it through podcasts, through blogs, through other mediums that are maybe shorter form, a little bit more digestible. I think this would do more harm than good for me. So I'm going to part ways with this one, even though there's like still a little part of me that feels like a little bit guilty, that feels like I need to read this. I'm really trying to just be really real with myself and free up the space, because I've had this for years and I've just never read it. This is one that I think I'm just gonna finally let go of. All right, next up is one that I read a long time ago, Dial A for Aunties. So this is a fun little romp. It's a rom-com, very light on the romance part. More or less, this gal accidentally kills somebody and then they're just kind of like covering up the crime with her aunties. It's heavy on Chinese Indonesian culture, I believe. So it was a fun one. It was cute. Again, just not something I need to reread. It's fun in the moment, but not necessarily something that I'm like, oh yeah, this like represents my taste. I think I gave this like 4 stars when I read it. Next up, oh, this is kind of a strange one. The Risen King by David Virgutz. This is kind of a weird story. I met this guy at a farmer's market by my parents' house. He lives near them. So I had planned to read the series. It's a high fantasy series. It's supposed to be really dark. He compared it more to like kind of like Game of Thrones style. So I actually still am really intrigued by this book and do want to read it, but I think I want to consume these on audio because I don't think I'll read it physically. I'm just not a big, like, I don't really read books physically anymore. I'm pretty much digital content only. So I just think that this has a better shot of me getting to it if I just purchase it on audiobook. This is the last one, I think, of the odds and ends. Oh, nope, I have one more. Hold on, let's do this one first. So next up, I have 4 Past Midnight by Stephen King. So this is a bind up of 4 novellas that he's done. Back when I used to read a lot more horror, Stephen King was obviously kind of a staple of my literary diet. I think this is actually my dad's. I think my dad gave this to me when he moved. I got a lot of like first dibs on all of his like Anne Rice books, Stephen King, and those sorts of books. So I had grabbed this one because I hadn't read any of the novellas yet, but I just don't like reading mass market paperbacks all that much. I have carpal tunnel, and so holding them actually is kind of painful for me. And also something about the paper, especially on this, like, it's an older book, really just gets me sneezing and gets my allergies going. So again, this is something that I would just rather pick up from the library digitally than try and like suffer through the experience of reading a mass market, just because of how uncomfortable it is for me to read them. It detracts so much from the experience of actually reading the books. But yeah, that's why I'm getting rid of that one. And then this is one that if you see it on my shelves, say nothing. I will not be held accountable because I'm still kind of going back and forth on it, and I probably won't get rid of it until I feel like really, really solid about it. But it's House of Leaves by Daniel Z. Danielewski. So this is a horror that I read a long time ago, but part of the reason I don't want to get rid of it is one, it's such a feat to read it because it's sort of like a combination of like found footage and then like researchers like notes and commentary kind of about this haunted house. So here's like a good page. So you have like the main text of the book, and then you can kind of see down here, this is the start of a whole page of like footnotes, which is like almost its own story. Sorry, I think I just hit the mic. But also it's got like cool sections like this, where it's just kind of like an interesting reading experience. Like it's sideways and upside down, and there's like little bits of text here, so you're only getting parts of it. Some of the pages are almost blank. Some of these are transcripts, newspapers and articles, and so it's an interesting read. It was a fun read just because there's so many different ways to kind of interpret it and so many different ways to read it. And so there's like part of me that like has had this on my shelf just as like a trophy of like, I survived reading this book. And again, it doesn't really represent my reading taste anymore. So I'm a little bit split. Like I definitely feel like I'm ready to move on. But then there's part of me that looks back on the reading experience with a lot of fondness. And so then like I kind of get reticent to get rid of it. But yeah, say nothing if you see this on my shelves. I won't be held accountable. Okay, those are all my weirdo odds and ends books. Let's get into some books maybe that I haven't read. And we'll start off with books that I have because of a video idea I had very early on when I started my channel that I just never quite did. So first up I have After by Anna Todd. So this is not a book that I have read. I think this is actually my friend's copy. I need to check with her. Oh yeah, this is a UK version. Okay, yeah, this is definitely her book. So I'll be giving this back to my friend. She had loaned it to me because I had this video idea that was more or less along the lines of like 10 years later, do these books kind of still hold up? Or like how have like romance books like changed over the past 10 years? Some commonalities between some of the books from that era and whether I like them. As someone who doesn't have any emotional attachment to any of these stories, I didn't read these books at this time. I was a very heavy fantasy, horror, sci-fi reader at this point, so I didn't read a lot of romance. That was one of them, so I'll get that back to her. Another one that I got that I think was also for that is Paper Princess by Erin Watt. This was kind of like one of the first books I remember hearing of like bully romances, and it was like just pre when new adult was kind of coming around, and so I kind of wanted to give this a go because I was like, oh, I feel like this kind of like sets the scene for a lot of what we see in new adult books these days. But again, that was just like a video I just never got around to. I don't feel super compelled to read that outside of that video idea. Next up, I have I think the first 3 books of the Crossfire series by Sylvia Day. So Bared to You, Reflected in You, and Entwined in You. So this I remember was kind of like a series that I heard. It was right around the time that like 50 Shades of Grey had kind of come on the scene, and we were starting to see more of those BDSM billionaire type romances. And so I didn't want to necessarily read 50 Shades of Grey just because I know too much about that series outside of the actual like book, and there's been a lot of commentary on that, but I don't hear as much about the Crossfire series, so I felt like that was going to be like a better option to kind of represent like that type of book. But obviously just never got around to reading this series. So what's kind of funny about this is like I really wrote these off, and then lately I've been seeing these books pop up more because people are doing the like what books made me posts on Instagram, and this is a series that comes up a lot. So then there's like part of me that's like, oh, maybe I should read it, but I think I just need to move on. It's been multiple years and I still haven't read those. So next up, I have November 9th by Colleen Hoover. So I purchased this like a while back when I was reading a lot more of Colleen Hoover's books. And the funny thing is I've unhauled like pretty much all of her other books. I think the only one that I have sitting on my shelves anymore is Verity. I never got around to reading this one. I just don't like books that are bound by time in some way or time constrained. I don't like that concept because I feel like it limits the growth of the couple. And so I just didn't have a ton of interest in this. And when I talked with a lot of friends, like this was like their least favorite Colleen Hoover. And I just don't really pick up Colleen Hoover. Oh my God. Like my 2 brain cells are warring for dominance right now. Good God. I just don't really find myself like gravitating towards Colleen Hoover anymore. There's like, I just look for different things in my stories these days. And it's just, you know, she served her purpose for the time, but yeah, just not really into her stuff anymore. Next up is a YA book, Shatter Me. This is a book that I actually, funny enough, have on my Nook which is the e-reader I had before I got Kindle. I remember reading this on like a beach vacation, and I had at one point when I was still reading YA intended to actually like go back, read this first book again, and then like try and like complete the series, but I just don't really read YA. And my sister also recently read Shatter Me, and she was complaining about the heroine, and I was like, yeah, I don't know why I keep this on my shelves thinking that I'm gonna reread it. Like, there's nothing about this that kind of like appeals to the modern and current me, and I kind of want to preserve the good memories that I have of this book. So I don't really have any desire to try and like reread this anymore. And also it just doesn't really hold like a special place in my mind. Like, I remember reading it, but I don't remember loving it the way like I think a lot of other people do. All right, next up. Here's a series I haven't read. I have the Lucy Score series, Things We Never Got Over, Things We Left Behind, and Things We Hide from the Light. So my sister-in-law was very, very sweet. I was over at her house, and her and I were talking about ACOTAR and different books that we were reading. And I mentioned that I hadn't read anything from Lucy Score before. And so she very sweetly, very kindly gave me these 3 books. And I had intended to read them mostly because I just wanted to be able to talk to her about them. But I'm just finding more and more that I am not a small town romantic suspense person. Just don't really have a ton of interest in trying to consume a small town romantic suspense that is that large and then also a series. I just don't think that that's gonna happen. And also, if I want to read these are still on KU, and I think my library has them, so I have lots of options if I decide that I want to read them. Again, I'm more of a digital reader anyway. It's just better for my carpal tunnel. Actually, even holding these up is actually kind of hurting, so I'm gonna put those down. But yeah, I'm gonna give those back to her because I feel bad having them on my shelf, and just like I feel like I'm hoarding them and like keeping them from her, so I just want to get those back to her. All right, next up I have a book that I actually really love, and it's Help Me Remember by Corinne Michael. So this is, I think, actually, funny enough, I just got done saying that I didn't like small town romantic suspense, but this was a book that I really, really enjoyed that had the amnesia trope in it. It was kind of the first time that I had read it in a really long time. This gal loses her memory but realizes she's engaged to somebody and didn't tell anyone. And so she's like trying to figure out who her fiance is and like why she has this big gap in her memory, why she was keeping a secret. It's a really good read. Again, it's not really a book that I'm planning to like revisit, especially because like the ending I really did not like on this one. I have fond memories of it, but again, if I want to reread this for any reason, I can reread it on KU. So I'm just kind of like, why is this sitting on my shelves? Especially because I read another book in that series and I absolutely hated it, like with a burning passion. So I feel like that's kind of like tainted my opinion and like enjoyment of that book a little bit, even though that one was pretty good minus the ending. Next up, I have The Hitman by Katrina Jackson. So I think actually, yeah, this is the Hello Lovely special edition. I got this on sale. It's a mafia series that's like in Italy. Like a gal finds out her fiance is cheating on her, and then she decides to go on the honeymoon anyway and ends up running into this like mafia guy. I did not enjoy this book. I thought it was like very average. It was really kind of corny to me. I think I actually have a reading vlog with this, but I was just kind of like, you know what? I think that this needs to come off my shelves. As pretty as this cover is, I think this cover is really cool. I didn't like the book. Why do I still have it sitting on my shelves? Next up is a book that I actually liked, but we got to make some hard choices. And this is just not a memorable book in the grand scheme of things. And that is Let There Be Light by A.M. Johnson. So this is about a kid that's kind of like coming to terms with the fact that he is gay during college and being at a religious college. I enjoyed this when I read it. It was very sweet. It was very quiet in a lot of ways, and it was more of like what I would think would be a true to the new adult experience of falling in love in college, a self-discovery portion. But again, it's not that memorable, and just like general contemporary like sweet romances don't tend to be my favorite. And although I really enjoyed it while I was reading it, I just don't need a copy of it on my shelves. Next up is Ali Hazelwood's Love on the Brain. So I have quite a few Ali Hazelwoods because I used to like to read her right as she came out, so I would purchase her books pretty much like right away. But this is by far my least favorite of hers. I really found the heroine to be kind of annoying with her galaxy space leggings and all of that. So this is definitely my least favorite of her books. And when it comes down to making tough decisions, this is just one that I'm like, I would never reread this. I don't need this on my shelves. And I don't need to have like Ali Hazelwood's complete backlist list because like I'm missing multiple other books of hers. So I'm like, why is this one of the ones that I own? Oh, Next up, this one kind of hurts. I'm getting rid of Wild Love by Elsie Silver. So it's kind of funny because Elsie Silver is definitely an author that used to be like auto buy, auto read, loved everything. And lately she's just been like on this slide down into books that I just have not been loving. And this was one of them. This one was actually so boring and so irritating in some ways that I didn't finish it. You can see my bookmark is in here. I just stopped reading it one day and I still pre-ordered the next book thinking like the next one will be like the one that I'm excited about. And I am going to keep that one because I haven't attempted to read that one yet, but I just don't need to own this one. Again, out of all the Elsie Silver books that I could own, this is not one I need to own. It's just like weird to have Elsie Silver be one of my favorite authors and yet this be one of my least favorite books from her and this be the one that I own. So even though I love this author, because I don't love this book, I just like, I need to get rid of it. And again, if I want to read it, it's on KU. I don't need a physical copy. Next up, I have House of Earth and Blood, Crescent City series. It's the first book by Sarah J. Maas. This one, I enjoyed it. It was actually one of my favorite SJM books when I first started out. I don't necessarily need this on my shelves. Like I own it in a different format. So I'm gonna get rid of this one because mostly guys, it's so chunky. I can get like 2 other books on my shelves if I get rid of this bad boy. So this is like a 4-star read for me. I enjoyed it, but like I said, I need to free up shelf space. So we got to make some hard decisions. And this is one of the ones that I'm going to have to let go. Okay, now we have like duets and series left. Ooh, look at me go. Oh, I didn't realize you could see that stack back there. Let's move that. Next up, I have The Hollow Heathens by Nicole Fiorina. So this is the first book. This is the Book of Blackwell, and this is the Book of Danvers, Bone Island. I really enjoyed this book a lot. It was like perfect around October because it's like spooky, eerie, definitely a lot of vibes. Like a lot of spooky vibes, a lot of creepy small town stuff, a lot of witches. And I really enjoyed this one. I think I own this in another format as well. I think I might own this on audiobook. Enjoyed this one, but again, we're needing to make space and this isn't like a perfect 5-star, like fell in love with it, need a physical copy of it. So I'm getting rid of that one. And then Bone Island, pissed me off. It's so chunky and it was so boring. It was so boring. And I loved the vibes of the small town in the first book. And then this book just like lost so much of that I was just kind of like really disappointed and I didn't love the romance. And I think too, because I don't like that second book as much, I don't feel as much like I need to own it because I'm like, it's not like I love the series. I loved one of the books, not both of them. Does that make sense? Anyways, so I'm getting rid of those two. Although these are like really cool. If you do like the series, Nicole Fiorina does like an incredible job with her hardbacks. She makes them look like special editions. So if you like her books, definitely look into her hardback editions because she puts a lot of work into them and they look beautiful. Next up, we have Court of Ravens duet by Liv Zander. So we have Feathers So Vicious and Shadows So Cruel. So this is a duet that I finished somewhat recently. But it's got these cool, like just on the Amazon edition, they have these cool like digitally printed edges. So I really enjoyed this series. I think the covers themselves are gorgeous, but when it comes to like dark fantasies, this isn't like one that I'm like, yes, this is it. Although I really did enjoy this series. Again, limited shelf space. This just isn't a duet that I necessarily feel like I need to own. All right, and last up, I have the Medicine Kate series by Tate James. So these are the out-of-print discrete covers. So I had purchased these. I'm just gonna hold up one of them. My wrists are really starting to hurt. So I had purchased these because they were going out of print and I didn't like the new covers. I had really enjoyed the Boys of Belrose series and the Valenchek series as well. This was like everybody's favorite Tate James series at the time. And so I was like, well, I love so many of her other series that I feel like are not as popular. I had kind of panic purchased these because I was like, oh, I want the original like covers. I didn't like the new ones that were being put out. I like read the first 2 books and then I just never finished the series. And I don't think I ever will because I don't want to go back and reread anything. So I think I'm just going to get rid of these bad boys because I'm just like, it just takes up so much room on my shelf. Like, that's so much space. So I just want to get rid of these and free up some space for other books. Like honestly, I would rather have like the Boys of Belrose series or just like a different series by Tate James even than that one. But So those are all the books that I have for you for this unhaul. As you can see, I made a lot of like tough decisions. There's a lot of books that have been like on my shelves for a while now. I finally had to make the call to get rid of them, but you know, I'm just not one of those people that actually gets a ton of joy of just like owning things generally. I think my book collection was starting to feel like it just didn't really represent me anymore. And it was starting to feel like I had like a number of books just to like have books on my shelf. And I didn't like that feeling. It felt cluttered. It felt junky. I'd rather just be able to feel like I have the space and ability to purchase like new all-time favorites and not have to hem and haw about whether or not I'll have space or like where I'm going to put them, because I want to make sure they don't get damaged and then they sit in a weird spot in my house for a while. That's why I am doing this. I've also been selling off quite a few of my special editions, because after doing this special edition video, I got really stressed out about how many I had and I didn't like how many I owned. So I've been slowly selling those off too. That's all I got for you for this unhaul. I just wanted to film this really quick and just kind of like talk through some of the reasons that I'm getting rid of like a lot of these books. Even though I enjoy them, I enjoy the vast majority of these. So if you saw one of your favorites and it made you sad to see me get rid of it, know that I'm a little bit sad too. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like the video if you did end up liking it. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more content from me, especially if you're a repeat watcher. Double check that you are actually subscribed. Some of you aren't, and I can see that on the back end analytics. Rude. I want to be friends with you. And I really, really hope that I see you on my next video. Bye-bye.